Good morning. My name's Alistair Cameron. I'm currently Global Quality Director for Baker Hughes, based in Aberdeen. I graduated from Aberdine University in 1997, I think, a long time ago now, with an honours degree in environmental science.
Great. So can you tell me about your decision to attend Aberdeen University and what factors have influenced that?
Yeah, there's not a straight answer to that one, but what I would say is that if I go back to the the early 90s, based as a kid in northeast of Scotland, it was all about the oil and gas industry. I didn't have a clear I didn't have a clear thought in my head exactly what I wanted to do, other than I'm sitting in the oil capital of the world, as they call it, and so there was lots of opportunity there. So really, the reason I attended Aberdeen University was it was a very, and still is, a very respected university, excelling in a lot of the sciences, and there's that hook into the northeast energy industry there was at the time. So I guess that was my main pool at the time.
Yeah. So did the oil and gas and the energy sector was that the reason that you chose to study environmental sciences?
Yeah, well, actually, I started out with a view that I'm quite a science sort of practical head on, despite doing what I do today, health and safety and quality. But back then, I started out with a joint honours in geography and petroleum geology. So I thought I was going down perhaps a slightly different route, maybe into the geology side in the oil and gas industry. So I did that for 2 years, but changed my view in what I was interested in whilst I was at university, and I dropped the geology part. So I suppose that shows that there is, or certainly was, flexibility. You're not necessarily signing away on 4 years or whatever.
Yeah.
At that point, and you can't ever change. So I think for me it was a decision I made. I think with the people at the time who were involved in my course study, and I followed a different path, and everything turned out fine. So there is flexibility there. You're not always set in stone, necessarily.
So what were some of your favorite elective courses while at Aberdeen?
Possibly the one. Well, there's maybe a couple. Forgive me if I don't remember the exact course elective names, but one I think was the sort of the physical geography element. And I remember the lecturer, John Smith. He was just a fantastic character, and the way he delivered it was an interesting topic to me, because I always loved geography coming through school, and that was part of why I brought it into university. So it was just core to my degree. It was a fantastic lecturer. He had some charisma in the way he was delivered, so I really loved that. And I guess another one, which was in first and second year, it was by all means not really core to the end goal, but I loved it. It was called space physics. It was, I guess it appealed to my inner nerd in that sense, very sciencey, and I loved all that stuff, and I still enjoy talking to my kids today about some of these things. So that was two that stand out to me.
Yeah. Okay. So what were some particular challenges that you faced while studying in Aberdeen?
Challenges. I suppose if I go back to the early mid-90s, laptops, computers weren't really mainstream. You had to go to the library, and there was a handful of boxy IBM PCs sat there with floppy disks. So I think if I reflect on how I work today and how I can deliver reports, presentations, or whatever, it's so much easier, and you've got so much more creative scope with the tools you have at your disposal, whereas back then it was maybe more limited. So other than that, I mean, I lived in Stonehaven at the time, which is where I actually reside today. So I wasn't on campus, so there was a travel element there. That was just my choice. I did live in Aberdeen for a period, just to be exposed to the student life more directly. But other than that, I can't think of any particular challenges that sit in my mind as something that was really difficult at that time.
Okay. So did you partake in any student organizations, clubs, or activities while at Aberdeen?
I didn't, no, actually. I don't think it's something I'd regret necessarily. I have to say, I maybe don't remember there having too much visibility of that. Maybe it's because I didn't feel a need to, because I still had the home base. I had friends still around, and I didn't, I wasn't like somebody who'd come from abroad like yourselves, into a new environment, making, new friends and connections, and, that was a way in to do that. So, no, I didn't take advantage of that.
Right. So, based on that, did you like make any new friends, like long-lasting connections while at Aberdeen?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, as people I'm still connected with today, similar interests. It's good to see some of them who are exploiting their degree a lot better than I didn't exploit my degree. We'll get onto that, but there's people that I'm still connected with who are still in Scotland. Actually, some who are travelled, and they're really passionate in delivering on what they went to university and learned. So yeah, it's good.
How did the networking skills that you learned in Aberdeen, like while being a student, help you in your career now?
I think, again, it's difficult to reflect on that, but I think it did help. Of course, I think going to university for many is a big step into the big wide world. You're away from the smaller, wherever you came from, your smaller school environment or education background, and you're almost thrust into an adult life and seeing the broader picture. So I think being able to interact and connect with different cultures, people with different backgrounds, of different interests, was really interesting to me. And I guess subconsciously it possibly did help as you go into your professional career, the ability to, or the want to explore new connections and relate to people with different viewpoints and such like. So yeah, I think I did help.
Yeah. So you mentioned before your aspirations or like your ideas when going into the energy sector. I mean, environmental sciences at Aberdeen. So what were some of your career aspirations while attending Aberdeen at the start? And then how do they change through your educational journey?
Yeah, I think I said earlier that I went to university without a clear path. It wasn't an architect or a lawyer or whatever. So I didn't have a distinct idea of what the outcome might be. All I knew was what I was interested in, what I maybe excelled at school, and then apply it in a broader sense at university. So so run that by me again, the question, sorry.
What were some of your career aspirations while attending and upon finishing university?
So I think I mentioned about the geology piece, and I think I tested that, and whilst it was interesting, I think I came to the conclusion that wasn't something I wanted to pursue a career on.
Yeah.
So I didn't then at that point decide that's what I want to do, but all I wanted to do was continue down the route, more the environmental science route, with a view to that could be useful in the industry. Certainly environment has always been, I know it's a different story now with emissions and ESG reporting and such like, but I knew that it would certainly form a part of what the oil and gas industry at that time, what's important to them.
Yeah. So what specifics of your degree do you apply in your day-to-day work today?
Well, ironically, it's I mentioned a lot about environmental science and the human impact and climate and everything else. So I did a lot of that, which almost went on the shelf on the back burner, and it actually really came to the fore with Altus intervention. Before we were acquired by Baker Hughes. So Altus intervention, just for context, 2014 is when they formed, and they were sold to Baker Hughes just last year, 2023. So I had quite a really broad responsibility across quality and HSE for that group of companies, and it was a privately owned company. And in the latter stages, we had to pull together a sustainability report. We had to start talking about emissions, start quantifying things. So this was a big voyage of discovery for me, because I was pretty much took that on as a key task. and worked with one of my colleagues, and we came out with a fantastic output, which was recognised with a lot of the operating oil companies that work here as leading edge for a company of our size, but also ultimately Baker Hughes who bought it. So I guess for the first time, that was me tapping back into some of that content that I'd studied at university. So it was almost, you think, well, I studied that and I went and did something else, but never, you just don't know when that learning, that knowledge might come into practice in later career life. So
yeah.
In my case, that's what happened.
Absolutely. So what are some key factors that helped you keep motivated while doing all your educational stuff at the university?
Keep motivated.
Yeah.
Well, the first point in motivation, I suppose, is you have to do something that interests you. I mean, I'm stating the obvious here, but I think if you're not following your passion or the things that really put the fire in your belly, I think that you're always going to maybe have a challenge for motivation. But for me, I've always been an active individual, I think, and the same stands to this day. It applies in your professional life. You know, if when you get some pressure or the stress, you know, I ride a bike. I like go riding my road bike. You just disconnect. So going through thesis writing or exam stages, you need to take that time out, balance the study and the hard effort and the mental strain with just, you know, switching off. So I had different avenues for that. I played squash with friends at university. I rode my bike. I did various things. So I think just doing something you're really passionate about is key, but also you need to factor in that time for your mental well-being.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So can you describe your job and responsibilities at Baker Hughes?
Yeah, I guess you could say I'm still working that one out because I'm new in this role from September last year. So and we're going through a big transition, so an integration between two companies.
Mm-hmm.
But in broad sense, my role is we Baker Hughes has many manufacturing plants where we have R&D, we design, we build, we test various, and in my context, wireline services tools. So basically, tools and widgets that you put into an oil well that enhance recovery. They might perforate a rock formation to stimulate flow. It might be something to set a plug, various things. So my role in the product quality sort of function is to oversee the quality of the product which leaves these plants. So there's lots of processes that how we prove and test and manufacture these products. So to ensure that what we deliver to the regions is fit for purpose and we don't impact on the customer's work, because that's the last thing we want to do.
Yeah. So you mentioned a lot about the mergers and acquisitions that you faced before. So how does that differ? How does your job differ now than like when you worked for Alice?
Good question. I think the role is at a similar level. You know, there's a global responsibility. I have a small team of people that work with me, but the biggest difference is Altus was 1,200 employees. Baker Hughes is 55,000 employees now. The wireline services piece is only a part of a small percentage of that, but it's a much bigger organization, much more complex, lots of silos that we're trying to break down, lots of complicated systems, because Baker Hughes themselves have gone in and out of acquisitions, which creates leaves collateral damage in systems and organizational structure. So the roles are similar, but my Altus role was, because it was a much smaller company, it was much more A to Z and much broader input into lots of things, whereas Baker, I'm much more focused onto a particular function.
Mm-hmm. So what made you decide to go into this field in particular, like overall?
Well, it was led from a degree, if I go back to that, because my first proper job, I worked in a department store called John Lewis as a part-time job whilst I was a student in Aberdeen University. Loved that because it was in the audio and television department and I loved all that stuff. And I did that full time until I got my first proper job, as I call it, and that was with a waste management company. So that was my first connection, taking the environmentally biased degree into a waste management organisation. It was just a simple sales role, but it allowed me to start connecting with oil and gas related companies and service companies and such like. So experience with that then led me to my first sort of HSE role, so health, safety, environmental role, where I could really start to apply some of the degree knowledge. So that was just right place, right time. There was a job for a company just actually the same industrial estate over here. Wrote a letter, pulled together a CV, had a conversation, and the rest is history. So it started there, really. Yeah.
Great. So how would you say one would get their foot in the door for this particular career?
For what I do today, or just in general? Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer because I think the landscape is changed. I think maybe it's right or wrong, but I see it as quite hard for people to differentiate themselves and get in the door today, can maybe compared to back when I did. I think certainly this year the industry is strong. We're on a massive rebound on the back of numerous factors, not least COVID. So there's a lot of optimism and a lot of growth if I'm talking about the energy industry. So one thing, but I think to get foot in the door, I mean, the only thing I can offer in terms of advice is you got to be proactive. You got to make it happen, and it's not just that. Doesn't just mean pulling together a CV or a personal statement and just firing them out. You be slightly more focused. Be proactive. Don't be afraid to kind of step in and be persistent with things. LinkedIn is a good place to start. Create your personal, professional background on LinkedIn. That way you can, it's perhaps an easier way to connect with these companies or in the people that you might be interested in pursuing a job with. So yeah, that's what I'd suggest.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So throughout your whole career, what were some of the most challenging moments, and how did you face them?
Oh, these are good questions. There's been a few challenging moments. I was based in the Middle East for a few years. My first step into management, where I had a big region. This was Middle East, Russia, Caspian, Central Asia. So it was geographically a big spread and a big spread of cultures. And Russia was particularly challenging, as you can imagine. There's a lot of very different culture. I was HSE at the time, and they're almost a little bit resistant or standalone to the culture that we had as a company I was working with at the time. We had a fatality with that organisation as well. That was the first time I'd faced. I wasn't there on the scene, but in my role, I was part of the notification, the reporting, the investigation. So that was particularly hard. But you pull in your professional skills, you follow the process, and but it is difficult. And I guess on the other side, another difficult moment would be COVID, to be perfectly honest. We were here in the UK, I think the UK was probably hit the hardest, so there's nothing operationally, it fell off the cliff. And at the time, as a private company, it's all about the cash flow and everything else, and very quickly that evaporated, and suddenly you're staring at, well, are we going to stay liquid here, or is this where it ends? So, but I guess that's where we were resilient. We kept the team together. We went a lot onto Teams and did a lot of team networking because people were working remotely. So it was all about keeping motivation at that point. That was difficult, but it was all learning how do we now communicate when we're all used to being together. But I guess that's a challenge that we've all faced to a degree. So that was probably the most recent one.
So how do you change your mind? How do you say your mindset and way of working have changed since attending Aberdeen?
I mean, that's been working quite a while since then. How's it changed? I don't know. Everybody works with a different. They've got their different methodologies, whatever works for them. For me, I've always operated in a sense. I like to be responsive, deal with things as they happen rather than sit on them. So it's just keeping on top of the cycle of whatever you're doing, whatever you go on to do. It's just keeping one step ahead of the curve. So having some structure, being prepared. I think presentation skills, these kind of things, which for me started back at university when we started doing these things, and that's just evolved year on year, and that's certainly paid dividends in later years as we've presented our company to sell to others. I think presentation skills, both personally how you communicate and how you put it down in paper, that's something that's changed for the better, for sure.
Okay. So university is obviously a time of personal growth and exploration. So were there any personal or significant milestones that you faced?
Not that I can think of. I don't think there was any one moment that certainly sticks in my mind that I could say, that was a.
Okay.
That sits in my. I can't think of anything specific.
So what were some of the unique skills and lessons, like you said, with the presentations? What were some other skills that you learned at university that you still apply to this day?
Well, I think just to expand on the presentation piece, it's probably, and again, it'd be different for everybody depending on what their educational background might be prior to university. But for me, it's probably the first time you're really given the opportunity to go and stand up in front of a group of people that you maybe didn't know, or maybe didn't know that well, and to present something you prepared. So on a topic that they could all critique almost. So I think that was probably one thing for sure. And I think that's an important thing. And again, depending on your background, that might be comfortable to individuals. Some people hate doing that kind of thing, but I think it's an invaluable skill to have, and that's one thing that I can remember.
Yeah. So, like you said, with presentations, university is sometimes a stressful time for students, especially with all the workload and the changes in life. So, how would you recommend that some of these students handle their stress? Like you mentioned with the bikes, but.
Yeah, I think I covered that to a degree, and I think it's, I guess it's a mindset thing, and it's, you can only control what you can control. You can't, I mean, it's easy to start worrying about things that are out with your control, but what you do have control of is you know your subject, you know your deadlines, you know what your content need to do is. If you're unsure about something, don't sit on it. You've got your fellow colleagues to go and connect with, your tutors or your lecturers or whatever they're called these days. So go ask questions if you're unsure about something, so you're not leaving something to the last minute. But I think so just getting ahead of the curve I mentioned, so that planning towards deadlines is important. But the other thing in terms of stress, because I get it and I mentioned that earlier, it's about that mental release, and you've got to plan in that time out to, whether it's going to the pub, riding a bike, or whatever you do that allows you to disconnect. You've got to factor that in, because that's an important part of it. But being prepared and planning properly with your deadlines, I think, is a key, and that's a key skill you'll take through your professional life as well.
Yeah. Talking about planning, while at university, do you partake in the internships, like part-time jobs?
No, none of that. I did have a part-time job, but it wasn't something that was driven by the university at the time.
Does Baker Hughes offer internships for students?
I believe they do. I'd have to come back to you on the details of that, because I'm not too knowledgeable on it. They've got a number of things that support bringing on young talent. They've got Aspire leadership programs and all sorts of things. So they're very forward-leaning into developing, as I say, young talent across all diversity groups as well. And but it's regional specific, depending which part of the world you're in. But they do certainly support that. Yeah.
So many students who are finishing their degree often struggle from the transition from academia to the working life. How did you navigate this, and do you have any recommendations for the students?
Well, as I mentioned, for me, I was kind of already in working life whilst at university, so I was used to dealing with customers, dealing with transactions, stock management, all these kind of things. So you're already getting used to a professional work environment, albeit in a part-time sense. So I think for sure that readies you for taking that next step to doing it full time. But again, everybody's different. Some people have to go and take a year off and soak everything in first. It's not my preference. I think that's, I'd just rather get stuck in and get moving forward. But that's what I'd recommend. It worked for me. If you can have a part-time or some role at work whilst you're at university, if it works with the balance we just talked about, with the stress and the load of what you got to do to deliver for your coursework, then that's certainly a good foothold into understanding what that transition might look like.
Yeah. So like we talked about with getting the foot in the door, do you have any tips and tricks for people who are trying to get in a specific field?
Well, as I mentioned, I think I'm not saying LinkedIn is the be all and end all, and it's the you'll get employment through LinkedIn for sure, because there's a lot of stuff on there, there's a lot of noise on there as well. But I think it's one way where you can establish a simple personal profile of who I am. These are my interests. Here's what I've achieved both in my university life and personal life. And then there's loads of you can either start following organizations that you're interested in working with, or they may be working in a sector you're interested in. There's interest groups in there that you can collaborate with fellow like-minded people, and you can ask questions in there. So certainly that's a good lead in. But back to my point I made earlier, you've got to be proactive. It's not just about throwing 100 CVs out there and hoping one sticks. I think you've got to take the lead a bit more and be a bit more direct where you can. But LinkedIn's a good place to start, and just publicly set up your profile of who you are.
Yeah. So do you have any advice for students who are almost done with their academic journey but unsure of what to do next?
Difficult one. I mean, I think one thing I'd say is, look, there's no hurry. You don't have to find your ideal career on year one after leaving university. I certainly didn't. I went into waste management, which is loosely related, but ultimately, as I said to you, it was a sales job. And I've never done sales really since. That's not my thing. But so don't rush it and don't panic. Don't get stressed about you have to leave university and suddenly land into your ideal company career. I think that for me the main thing is, if you can get somehow related to what so you can start to build that history of work in the sector you want to pursue. But don't be rushed though. Don't get panicked that you have to land in that dream job in year one, because invariably it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just could change paths completely anyway. So yeah,
absolutely. So if you could go back in time and give yourself some advice while at university, what advice would you give?
Study harder, without a doubt. No, I'm reflecting my younger self. Study harder for sure. I didn't not apply myself, but I could have. I'm 48, right? And it's easy to have the old head on now and say, oh, I could have worked harder, I could have done a better job, or could have explored a different degree, but you've got to enjoy student life as well. So I don't know what advice to give there. I mean, it's you've got to enjoy it. Choose what Don't get bogged down, and you have to have a defined career at the end of it. Although that helps. Follow your passion, what you're interested in, because we talked about motivation, and then start building that professional profile in preparation for when when you leave, and might just help you align where you might want to head.
Mm-hmm. So, if you could go back in time and change anything about your experience at university, what would that be?
Not much. I think the only thing I might have done, I mentioned I lived fairly locally, and there's pros and cons to that. The advantage being obviously I can be based at home if I want. I did live in Aberdeen with a couple of friends for a period of time, but so that's good. But the disadvantage is you're less likely to go. We talked about connecting with everybody else. So I think the disadvantage to that was I maybe wasn't as ingrained into meeting, connecting. You talked about, asked questions about, I can't remember what you called them, not resource groups, but clubs and societies and such like. Had I been coming from further afield to Aberdeen, I would have been much more inclined to explore that. So looking back, maybe I should have explored that, because without doubt there would be something that might have been interesting, and then it opens up a whole bunch of new avenues of connections and such like. So I don't regret anything, but that's something I probably could have done a bit more, but that was just a fact. I was living at home.
All right, well, thank you much.
All right, you're welcome.
Yeah.